Dr. Baird for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this round of questions is going to go to all the witnesses, but this is going to be a ladies' first round. So, but I want to know what policies that Congress, the Department of Energy, and other relevant federal agencies might do to encourage industry-led research and development efforts, critical materials research, and so on. But before we do that, Dr. Hayes, I noticed in your testimony that this is the International Year of the Periodic Table. Is that 2018 or 2019?
2019.
So anyway, I noticed that helium was on the second element on that, and then you also mentioned that it's very, very small and it can escape anything. Helium can escape anything. So I was wondering if we're doing any research on some kind of container. I'm just kidding you. So anyway, but back on the question of what policies could Congress and Department of Energy and so on, other federal agencies do to encourage industry-wide research and development. So, Dr. Hayes.
I would start by saying basic research funding has been a challenge over the time of my career. And, I think we need to see increases in that basic research funding and also encourage ties to industry and finding mechanisms to do so. 3-year grant cycles make it difficult to achieve those things. I might highlight, tied to supply chain issues, this is maybe outside the purview of this committee, but just to highlight that the strategic helium reserve that is being privatized in 2021, here we have an abundant source of helium, one of the top 3 producers worldwide. You mentioned a container. That is one of the only containers for helium. It keeps it underground, yet we're about to sell it off to a private company that may belong to a foreign entity. And so even though that's outside this committee's purview, I think that that's something to keep in mind. So what can Congress do? Maybe keep the container, keep our production capacity of something that we are a leader worldwide. So I'll let others respond with that.
So another important part of research in moving it actually into commercialization and creation of a supply chain is that it goes from research, development, and demonstration. And what we found in many cases is that we're not serving our country well by throwing the technology, the science over the wall and expecting then industry just to be able to take it forward without additional scientific help as they move forward at the demonstration, the development and demonstration stage. So I think that could be one important policy emphasis in making sure that we maintain those connections during the commercialization stage, because in this technology readiness level, 1 through 4 is the early stage research. To get to commercialization, you've got 5 through 9, and that is where that valley of death happens. And the valley of death happens frequently because something wasn't determined in the early research stage, but if they had access to that research capability, then they could overcome it.
Thank you. Dr. Schwartz.
So there are big companies, very large companies, that do fund critical materials research. CMI partners with a number of them. Ames Laboratory partners with a few others, and I know that there is significant investment by some of our largest companies in critical materials and other research. Small companies don't have the resources to do that. They simply can't afford. Those small companies often have access to small business incentive programs for jointly funded research. I think that if there are ways to incentivize industry to come forward, to U.S. industry to come forward and say, these are what the biggest scientific challenges are going out 5 years or 10 years. That would be the areas that universities and national laboratories could have a big impact on. In terms of specific research, in terms of a specific hurdle in order to become profitable or to make a larger impact on the global supply chain, I'm sure policies could be put in place that would, something that Representative Foster maybe alluded to. Are there ways that Congress or the United States could make U.S. companies more competitive in the industrial market, in the international market?
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, could I have Mr. Weiss comment?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize what Dr. Handwerker said about the industrial collaboration. We see TRL levels are supposed to always go up over time as research continues. That's not always the case. You sometimes get it up to a 7, and then you miss a critical piece, and you fall back down that chain again. And so at least there is a role for some research in the later stages of development and commercialization, and I think that's very important. The other comment that I have is the way that the CMI system is set up. It's a bit of a dream team because there are people at the academic institutions and at the national labs that understand some fundamental business economics. So when we have our weekly calls on our program and someone suggests something and I say, you can't do that because it's going to cost you $2 a pound, there's an understanding that even though it's a great idea, it's never going to go anywhere. And so we cut off those dead ends very, very quickly by having a very close relationship between the researchers and, in this case, ourselves. Thanks.
Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want